Naomi Brooks did not look like the most powerful person in the room. That was the first mistake nearly everyone made when they saw her. As the applause faded from Victoria Langford's performance at the front of the ballroom, Naomi remained seated at the far end of the executive table, her hands folded calmly over a leather portfolio. She wore a charcoal blazer, a simple white blouse, and understated jewelry. No designer logos. No dramatic entrance. No entourage surrounding her. Nothing about her appearance matched the image many people in the room expected from a woman responsible for billions of dollars in assets and some of the most successful infrastructure projects in North America. Around her, investors exchanged quiet whispers. A few executives glanced her way before returning their attention to the Langford family. To them, Richard Langford was the headline. Victoria was the future. Naomi was simply another partner attending the event. That assumption had followed her for most of her career. 20 years earlier, she had walked into a venture capital office in Dallas carrying a business plan that would eventually generate hundreds of millions in revenue. The receptionist had mistaken her for a courier and pointed toward the delivery entrance. Naomi remembered the embarrassment. She remembered the silence. Most of all, she remembered the lesson. Never interrupt people while they reveal who they are. Across the ballroom, servers moved between tables carrying glasses of sparkling water, while giant digital displays showcased the joint venture's achievements. Every slide featured the Langford name in large letters. Every speech celebrated the Langford legacy. What few people understood was that many of those celebrated achievements had been impossible without Naomi's company. The highways, energy facilities, logistics hubs, and international contracts displayed on the screens all carried her fingerprints. She had spent years building relationships, negotiating deals, and securing funding while others took photographs and accepted awards. That difference never bothered her. Results mattered more than recognition. At least that was what she told herself. Near the stage, Victoria continued greeting guests as if she already owned the future. Every smile seemed rehearsed. Every laugh sounded slightly louder than necessary. Several reporters gathered around her, eager to capture quotes from the billionaire's daughter expected to inherit one of the country's most recognizable business empires. Naomi watched quietly. She noticed the confidence. She also noticed something else. Arrogance. The kind that grows when a person has spent too much time hearing applause and not enough time hearing truth. A young financial analyst named Sophia Carter stood near one of the side screens reviewing presentation figures on a tablet. Her brow tightened for a moment before she looked toward Naomi. Something about the numbers did not align with the narrative being presented on stage. Sophia glanced between the charts and the executive seating arrangement. Unlike most people in the room, she paid attention to details. Meanwhile, Richard Langford worked the crowd with practiced ease. Every handshake looked effortless. Every conversation seemed carefully calculated. Yet several times his eyes drifted toward Naomi. Not with hostility, with caution. Unlike his daughter, Richard knew exactly who she was. He knew what she had built. He knew how much influence she carried. And he knew that beneath Naomi's calm expression was a woman who never entered a room without understanding every possible outcome. As another round of applause filled the ballroom, Naomi slowly reached for her glass of water. Her expression never changed. Her pulse never quickened. The room saw a quiet executive sitting alone. What they failed to see was a woman already several moves ahead of everyone else. The formal presentation resumed, but the atmosphere around the executive tables had begun to change. Victoria Langford returned to the center of the stage carrying herself like a woman who believed every spotlight belonged to her. The massive screens behind her displayed projections, growth charts, and future expansion plans tied to the joint venture. Investors nodded. Reporters took notes. Cameras followed her every movement. Then the questions began. At first they sounded harmless. One investor asked about operational funding over the next 5 years. Another asked about international expansion. Victoria answered confidently, but each response seemed designed to place the Langford family at the center of every success. Eventually her attention shifted toward Naomi. The change was subtle at first. A glance, a smirk, a carefully chosen remark. Then it became impossible to miss. Some partners contribute capital, Victoria said, smiling toward the audience. Others simply benefit from being attached to the right name. A few people laughed. Naomi remained still. Victoria continued. Brand value matters. Legacy matters. Reputation matters. That is something money alone cannot buy. More laughter followed. Several executives looked toward Naomi before quickly looking away. The room felt warmer now. The tension no longer hid beneath polished corporate language. It was beginning to show itself openly. Richard Langford sat near the front row watching carefully. He did not join the laughter. His expression remained unreadable. He seemed less interested in the joke and more interested in Naomi's reaction. But Naomi gave him nothing. She simply listened. Across the ballroom, Sophia Carter lowered her tablet and frowned. The more she reviewed the financial reports, the more uncomfortable she became. Numbers rarely lied. People did. According to internal projections, a surprising percentage of future liquidity came from one source: Naomi's company. Sophia checked again. Then again. The percentages remained the same. A cold realization settled over her. The public narrative being presented on stage was not matching the actual structure of the partnership. Back near the stage, Victoria seemed encouraged by the audience response. "The truth is," she continued, "not everyone at the table creates equal value. Some people are lucky enough to be invited into the room." The words landed like stones. Several investors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others smiled nervously. Everyone understood who she meant. Naomi slowly lifted her glass of water and took a small sip. Nothing more. That calm seemed to frustrate Victoria. She expected resistance. She expected emotion. Instead, she found silence. The kind of silence that forces people to keep talking until they reveal too much. "Our family built this venture," Victoria said. "Without our leadership, none of this would exist." This time the room did not laugh as loudly. Even some supporters appeared hesitant. Sophia looked up sharply from her tablet. The statement was not merely arrogant. It was inaccurate. She had the financial records in front of her. Meanwhile, Naomi set her glass down carefully. Her expression never changed. Yet something shifted behind her eyes. The room could not see it. Victoria could not see it. But the line between confidence and recklessness had just been crossed. And somewhere beneath the applause, beneath the speeches, and beneath the carefully polished image of the Langford Empire, the first cracks had already begun to form. Sophia Carter stared at the numbers again. Then she checked them a third time. The ballroom buzzed with conversation, but the sound seemed distant now. Her attention was locked on the financial structure buried deep inside the joint venture reports. Something was wrong. Or rather, something was being hidden. Every public presentation that evening painted the same picture. The Langford family appeared to be the foundation holding everything together. Their name dominated the branding. Their executives occupied the stage. Their photographs filled the screens. Yet the financial documents told a completely different story. Sophia opened another report and compared funding allocations over the previous 4 years. Her eyes widened. The largest liquidity commitments did not originate from Langford Capital. They originated from Naomi Brooks and her company. Not by a small margin, by an overwhelming one. A quiet feeling settled into Sophia's stomach. She was witnessing two realities existing in the same room. One was being presented publicly. The other was supported by facts. Near the stage, Victoria continued accepting praise from investors. Several guests approached her table offering congratulations on the expected expansion announcement. Victoria welcomed every compliment as though it confirmed everything she already believed about herself. At one point she glanced toward Naomi and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone convinced she had already won. Naomi acknowledged nothing. She simply listened as conversations unfolded around her. The ballroom lights reflected softly against the polished glass tables. Waiters moved through the crowd. Reporters prepared questions for the upcoming media session. Everything looked elegant on the surface. Underneath, tension was slowly gathering. Sophia stood from her chair and quietly approached one of the senior finance officers assigned to the event. "Can I ask you something?" she said. The man looked up. "Sure." Sophia lowered her voice. "Why does every presentation make it sound like Langford Capital is carrying the venture?" The executive hesitated. "Because that is the public perception." Sophia frowned. "That is not what the numbers say." The executive looked around carefully before answering. "Not everything presented to the public reflects operational reality." Then he walked away. The answer only deepened her concern. Across the room, Richard Langford noticed Sophia studying the reports. His expression tightened slightly. It lasted less than a second before disappearing behind a practiced smile. Naomi noticed it too. She missed very little. Another investor approached Victoria. "Your family must be proud," he said. Victoria laughed. "This venture became successful because we knew how to lead it." Several nearby guests nodded. One even raised a glass in agreement. Sophia looked down at the figures in disbelief. According to the reports in her hands, if Naomi's funding commitments disappeared, the venture would face immediate and severe pressure. Expansion plans would stall. Financing schedules would collapse. Multiple projects would be delayed. Yet nobody seemed willing to say it aloud. Nobody except the numbers themselves. She looked toward Naomi again. The woman sat calmly at the table, showing no sign of irritation despite the comments directed at her throughout the evening. That calm fascinated Sophia. Most people would have defended themselves by now. Most people would have demanded recognition. Naomi did neither. It was almost as if she already knew exactly how the night would end. As the next presentation prepared to begin, Sophia closed the reports and drew a slow breath. For the first time that evening, she understood something important. The most powerful person in the ballroom was not standing under the spotlight. She was sitting quietly outside of it, and almost nobody had realized it yet. The next segment of the evening was supposed to celebrate the future. Instead, it became the moment everything began to fracture. Victoria Langford stepped back onto the stage as the ballroom lights dimmed slightly. A giant screen behind her displayed the words "Vision for the next decade." Investors turned their attention forward. Reporters lifted their cameras. The atmosphere felt polished, controlled, and carefully managed. Victoria smiled as she approached the podium. "Success belongs to people willing to lead," she said, "not to people waiting for others to create opportunities for them." A few guests applauded. Her eyes drifted toward Naomi. The message was obvious. So was the target. Naomi remained seated. Her posture never changed. The room watched one woman perform confidence while another quietly possessed it. Victoria continued. "Some individuals spend years attaching themselves to stronger brands. They mistake access for achievement." Several executives laughed. This time the laughter sounded forced. Even those who supported Victoria could feel the tension growing heavier. Across the ballroom, Sophia Carter lowered her tablet. The financial report sat open beside her. Every number contradicted the story being told on stage. She looked around the room and wondered how many people actually knew the truth. Then Victoria crossed a line that even some supporters did not expect. She leaned slightly forward and smiled. "The reality is simple. People like us built these rooms. People like us created these opportunities. Some should be grateful just to have a seat at the table." The words landed with a dull weight. Silence followed. Not complete silence. The kind of silence that appears when a room suddenly realizes something inappropriate has been said. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes toward the stage. Her face revealed nothing. Yet for the first time that evening, Richard Langford looked genuinely concerned. His jaw tightened. He understood exactly how dangerous those words were. Victoria did not. She mistook the silence for agreement. Naomi felt an old memory surface. 23 years earlier, she had walked into a financing meeting in Atlanta carrying the business proposal that would become her first major company. She remembered the conference room. She remembered the expensive suits. She remembered presenting projections that later proved accurate. What she remembered most was the comment made after the meeting. One executive had smiled politely and said, "You should be grateful we even listened." The room had laughed then too. She had left that building with nothing but determination and a promise to herself. Never ask permission to succeed. Build something so strong that permission becomes irrelevant. The memory faded. The ballroom returned. Victoria was still speaking, still smiling, still unaware. Sophia looked toward Naomi and noticed something subtle. It was not anger. It was certainty. The kind that comes from knowing the facts are stronger than opinions. Around the room, conversations began in low whispers. Investors exchanged glances. A few reporters typed notes into their phones. Even people who knew nothing about the partnership structure sensed the atmosphere changing. Richard finally stood from his seat and walked toward the stage. His movement drew attention immediately. Victoria paused. "Dad?" she asked quietly. Richard forced a smile. "Perhaps we should move to the signing portion of the evening." The suggestion sounded less like guidance and more like an attempt to stop a fire before it spread. Victoria looked confused but nodded. Meanwhile, Naomi reached calmly into her portfolio and removed her phone. No dramatic expression, no speech, no warning. She looked at the screen for a moment and typed a single message. Then she placed the phone back on the table. Somewhere beyond the ballroom, that message began moving through legal departments, executive offices, and financial systems. The first domino had just fallen. Almost nobody noticed it. But before the night was over, everyone would. The signing ceremony was scheduled to begin in less than 10 minutes. Guests returned to their seats while assistants distributed final briefing packets across the ballroom. From a distance, everything appeared normal. The presentations were finished. The speeches were ending. The cameras were ready for the photographs that would accompany tomorrow's headlines. Yet beneath the polished surface, invisible machinery had already begun moving. Thousands of miles away, attorneys received priority notifications. Compliance teams opened secured files. Financial officers reviewed authorization codes that had not been activated in years. Naomi Brooks sat quietly at her table while the process unfolded exactly as designed. She did not check her phone again. She did not need to. The message had been delivered. The protocol was already running. Across the room, Victoria Langford laughed with a group of investors. Her confidence seemed stronger than ever. She interpreted Richard's concern as caution. She interpreted the room's silence as respect. Most importantly, she interpreted Naomi's calm as weakness. That was her greatest mistake. Richard returned to his seat beside the stage and immediately opened his phone beneath the table. A new email had arrived. Then another. His expression darkened. He read the subject line twice before locking the screen. For the first time all evening, he looked directly at Naomi. She met his gaze for only a second before returning her attention to the stage. Nothing needed to be said. Sophia Carter noticed the exchange. Her instincts told her something significant had changed. The atmosphere felt different now. Less like a celebration, more like a countdown. She opened her tablet once more and reviewed the partnership structure. Buried deep within the documents was a clause she had overlooked earlier. Her eyes widened as she read it carefully. Then she read it again. The provision was clear. Certain funding commitments remained entirely discretionary. They were not guaranteed. They were not permanent. They could be withdrawn under specific conditions. Sophia felt a chill move through her chest. Suddenly, the financial architecture of the entire venture looked far more fragile than anyone realized. Near the stage, the master of ceremonies announced the upcoming signing session. Applause filled the ballroom. Cameras flashed. Executives began taking their assigned seats. Victoria approached the signing table wearing a triumphant smile. "Tonight marks the beginning of something even bigger," she announced. The audience responded politely. Naomi rose from her chair and walked toward the table. Every movement remained calm and deliberate. No anger, no visible frustration, just certainty. Several reporters noticed her expression and exchanged curious glances. Richard watched her approach with growing concern. His phone vibrated again. This time he did not check it immediately. He already suspected what it contained. Meanwhile, in offices across the country, review teams continued processing instructions connected to Naomi's authorization. Legal approvals were confirmed. Financial notices were prepared. Internal alerts moved from department to department with quiet efficiency. None of the guests in the ballroom knew any of this. They saw only a signing ceremony. They did not see the foundation shifting beneath it. Sophia looked from her tablet to Naomi and finally understood what made the woman different from everyone else in the room. Naomi never fought for power in public. She exercised it in private. While others chased attention, she controlled outcomes. As the ceremonial documents were placed on the table and cameras focused on the executives, Victoria leaned toward Naomi and smiled. "I hope tonight taught you something," she said softly. Naomi looked at her for a moment. Then she returned a calm smile of her own. "It did," she replied. "It reminded me how expensive arrogance can become." Victoria laughed quietly, unaware that the cost of that lesson was already being calculated. The ballroom fell quiet as the final documents were placed on the signing table. Camera crews moved closer. Reporters prepared their headlines. Investors leaned forward in anticipation. Everything had been designed to celebrate expansion. Everything had been designed to showcase the Langford family. Yet the mood had shifted in ways most people could not explain. Richard Langford sat unusually still. His phone rested beside him face down. 3 unanswered notifications waited on the screen. He knew opening them would only confirm what he already suspected. Across the table, Naomi Brooks reviewed the documents one final time. Her expression remained calm. Her posture remained steady. She looked less like someone attending a ceremony and more like someone observing the final moments of a test. Victoria noticed the silence and mistook it for uncertainty. She leaned back in her chair and smiled confidently. "You know," she said loudly enough for nearby executives to hear, "not everyone is built for rooms like this. Some people spend their entire careers trying to earn a place they were never meant to occupy." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. The comment landed harder than the earlier ones because there was no ambiguity left. The target was obvious. Naomi slowly closed the folder in front of her. Then she looked directly at Victoria. For the first time all evening, the room stopped moving. Even the photographers lowered their cameras slightly. Naomi's voice was calm. "That is an interesting perspective." Victoria smiled. "It is the truth." Naomi nodded once. "Then perhaps it is time everyone heard the whole truth." The room became still. Richard closed his eyes briefly. Sophia Carter looked up from her tablet. Every instinct told her the moment had arrived. Naomi stood from her chair. No dramatic gesture. No raised voice. Just quiet confidence. "For the last 4 years," she began, "many people have assumed this venture was sustained by reputation. Tonight seems to have confirmed that assumption." Several executives exchanged nervous glances. Naomi continued, "But reputation does not fund infrastructure projects. Reputation does not secure international financing. Reputation does not provide liquidity during market disruptions." Victoria's smile began to fade. Naomi reached into her portfolio and removed a single document. "Money does." The ballroom remained silent. Specifically, Naomi continued, $2.7 billion of committed capital supplied by my company. The words struck the room like a sudden change in gravity. Several investors immediately looked toward Richard. Others opened their briefing packets. Sophia watched faces change one by one as realization spread through the crowd. Naomi placed the document on the table. 72% of this venture's operational funding originates from my organization. The expansion announced tonight depends on capital commitments controlled exclusively by my board. Victoria stared at her. "That is impossible." Naomi looked at her calmly. "No, it is documented." Richard finally spoke. His voice was low. "Victoria." But it was too late. The room had already turned. Naomi continued, "You believed your name built this partnership. My capital built it. You believed your family controlled its future. The agreements say otherwise." Reporters began typing furiously. Investors whispered among themselves. The confidence that had filled the ballroom all evening started evaporating. Then Naomi delivered the sentence nobody would forget. "You mocked me in a venture your family does not control." Complete silence followed. Not polite silence. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind of silence that appears when an entire room realizes it has misunderstood who truly held the power from the very beginning. And at that moment, every eye in the ballroom shifted away from Victoria Langford and toward Naomi Brooks. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The ballroom remained frozen beneath the weight of Naomi Brooks's revelation. The giant screens that had celebrated the partnership all evening suddenly seemed different. The same numbers, the same projections, the same promises. Yet now everyone understood who had actually made them possible. Victoria Langford stared across the table as if reality itself had shifted without warning. "That cannot be right," she said quietly. Her confidence was gone. Naomi did not respond immediately. She simply slid the supporting documents across the table. Richard Langford reached for them first. His hands moved slower than before. He reviewed the pages carefully. Every figure matched what he already knew. Every clause confirmed what he feared. Across the ballroom, phones began vibrating almost simultaneously. Investors checked messages. Analysts opened alerts. Advisors received updates from their firms. The information was spreading faster than anyone expected. Near the back of the room, several reporters stepped away to make urgent calls. One headline had just become a much bigger story. Then Richard's phone rang. He looked at the screen and answered immediately. He listened for less than 30 seconds before ending the call. The color drained from his face. Victoria noticed. "What is happening?" she asked. Richard did not answer right away. Another phone rang. Then another. One executive stood abruptly and walked toward the exit while speaking into a headset. Two investment managers began reviewing financial models on tablets. The atmosphere transformed from celebration to crisis management in real time. Sophia Carter watched the chain reaction unfold. Every assumption she had questioned throughout the evening was now collapsing in public. She opened the latest update that had just appeared in her inbox. Her eyes widened. Naomi's withdrawal protocol had entered active implementation. Funding commitments tied to future expansion phases were being suspended pending board review. The implications were enormous. Back at the signing table, Victoria looked around at the growing confusion. Somebody explain this to me. Naomi finally spoke. You believe the venture depended on your family's reputation. Her voice remained calm. The market depends on certainty. Tonight, certainty changed. Another notification appeared on Richard's phone. This one came from a major lending institution. Moments later, another arrived from a strategic partner requesting an emergency discussion. The dominoes were falling exactly as Naomi's team had anticipated. Not because she wanted chaos. Because business follows facts. And facts had finally entered the room. Investors who had ignored Naomi earlier now approached cautiously. Some requested clarification. Others asked for meetings. A few simply wanted to introduce themselves properly. The contrast was impossible to miss. Hours earlier, many had treated her as a secondary figure in the partnership. Now she had become the center of every conversation. Victoria remained seated. The applause that had followed her throughout the evening had disappeared. So had the certainty. Richard slowly placed the documents on the table and looked at his daughter. There was disappointment in his expression, but also recognition. He understood exactly when the damage had begun. Not when the funding changed. Not when the call started. The damage began the moment arrogance replaced respect. Naomi gathered her portfolio and prepared to leave the table. Around her, executives rushed between conversations while advisors attempted to calculate new scenarios. The empire that had appeared untouchable only an hour earlier suddenly looked vulnerable. And through it all, Naomi remained exactly what she had been from the beginning of the evening. Calm, prepared, and completely in control. Naomi Brooks paused near the ballroom exit and looked back one final time. The room she had entered hours earlier was almost unrecognizable now. The confidence that had filled the stage had been replaced by urgent conversations. Investors gathered in small circles discussing revised projections. Advisors reviewed contingency plans. Reporters rushed to file updated stories before competitors could do the same. The celebration everyone expected had become a lesson nobody would forget. Yet Naomi felt no satisfaction from watching people struggle. That had never been her goal. She had not activated the withdrawal protocol to embarrass anyone. She had activated it because respect matters in business. Character matters in leadership. And when those things disappear, consequences eventually arrive. Across the ballroom, Sophia Carter stood quietly observing the aftermath. She had entered the evening believing she was attending a routine corporate event. She was leaving with a completely different understanding of power. Real power, she realized, rarely announces itself. It does not demand attention. It does not need applause. It simply exists until the moment it must be used. Richard Langford finally approached Naomi before she reached the exit. The noise of the ballroom seemed to fade around them. For a moment, neither person spoke. Then Richard nodded slowly. I owe you an apology. Naomi studied him calmly. Richard continued. Not for the business decisions. Those belong to the market. But for allowing this environment to develop. Naomi considered his words. Leadership is not measured when everything is working, she replied. It is measured when people reveal who they are. Richard lowered his eyes briefly. He understood exactly what she meant. Nearby, Victoria remained seated at the signing table. The arrogance that had fueled her confidence all evening had vanished. In its place sat something unfamiliar. Reflection. For the first time, she was confronting the difference between inheritance and achievement. Between attention and accomplishment. Between assumptions and facts. Naomi looked toward her for a moment. Then she walked over. Several people stopped talking as she approached. Victoria slowly looked up. Naomi's voice remained calm. You spent the evening deciding who belonged in this room. Victoria said nothing. Naomi continued. The strongest leaders never waste time deciding who belongs. They focus on what everyone can contribute. The words carried no anger. That made them impossible to dismiss. Victoria lowered her gaze. The lesson had finally reached her. Naomi stepped back and adjusted her portfolio beneath her arm. Then she addressed the room one last time. Not loudly, not dramatically, Yet every person seemed to hear her. Money can build companies. Contracts can build partnerships. But respect is what keeps them standing. The moment people mistake silence for weakness, they stop seeing clearly. And when leaders stop seeing clearly, they eventually lead themselves into failure. The ballroom remained still. No applause followed. None was needed. The truth carried enough weight on its own. Naomi turned and walked toward the exit. This time nobody overlooked her. Nobody underestimated her. Nobody questioned why she belonged. As the doors closed behind her, the room remained quiet for several seconds. Then the conversations resumed. The calculations resumed. The rebuilding resumed. But one thing had changed forever. Every person present now understood a lesson worth far more than $2.7 billion. Naomi never raised her voice. She raised the standard.